Science isn't consensus, and if it's consensus, it isn't science. And that's why I'm very, very concerned when I hear somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about consensus.
This is world-renowned astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, a scientist, explaining why you and everybody out there shouldn't ask questions. Watch.
There's a list of top-ranking medical professionals. Just take a look at them here.
Excuse me,
Dr. Peter McCullough. No, I want to go through what happened
consensus.
Here. This is the problem with the consensus.
The consensus.
Okay,
medical professional.
I want you to
because the medical is so huge. I can find you an astrophysicist who is sure we've been visited by aliens. That's not the
problem was the scientific method died here, and this is the point I want to make. It died a death here, and I need you to help me save it because Dr. Peter McCullough is the leading cardiologist.
I don't care if titles don't matter here.
But what should matter?
They don't matter.
What
matters
should matter?
Is the consensus. I'm not interested in medical pedigree. I'm interested in medical consensus, in scientific consensus.
Scientists that were on the ground, that were dealing with patients, were being censored, were being shut down. Their YouTube channels were being shut down. Their LinkedIns were being shut down.
Because the individual scientist does not matter.
So let me get this straight. The scientist doesn't want you to follow the scientific method because it goes against the scientific consensus, even if the consensus was wrong. And it's not just the vaccines. The consensus did the same thing with COVID. Remember when Fauci and company said COVID came from a wet market? That lab leak theory went against the fake consensus. If you mentioned it, you got censored and smeared as a crazy person. Hey, kook, the coronavirus came from a bat. Definitely not the coronavirus lab around the corner.
But I think the most embarrassing one of them all is in the consensus is Ignaz Semmelweis. He was a medical pioneer persecuted for telling the truth. So what truth did he figure out? Hey guys, wash your hands after doing an autopsy. Something as basic as that. Because he figured out that the death rate in the hospital for birthing mothers, it was a lot higher in one wing than the other wing. He figured out, well, what's the difference? Well, in one wing, you got the nurses delivering babies, and then the other wing, you got doctors. And what were the doctors doing before they delivered the babies? They were doing autopsies on the mothers who died the day before, and they went from the dissecting room to the birthing room without washing their hands. And it just seems so embarrassing that, and he had the data. This is 1847. He said, wash your hands, scrub your fingernails with chlorine. And yet he was rejected and ridiculed by those older contemporaries. He was going up against consensus, and thank God he did, but they never gave him the credit he deserved, even when he had the data. He was running a hospital and he had a 1% death rate for mothers. There was other hospitals, they had a 10 to 15% death rate. And yet they mocked him. They said it was time to stop the nonsense about chlorine hand wash. And it's very, very embarrassing for the medical profession and for the scientific profession. And it may be embarrassing today. What are we believing today that people look back at as embarrassing? And they even came up with the Semmelweis reflex. That's where long-held ideas can remain entrenched despite potent evidence to the contrary, and people can and do persecute those who challenge the consensus, even when the consensus is wrong. Even when it's wrong. And so the medical profession, they had a pretty embarrassing time back then. But again, I think they had a pretty embarrassing time lately, too. This is a book by Pierre Corey. It's called The War on Ivermectin. And in here he says that maybe 10% of the doctors he knows can think critically. The rest of them just want to follow procedures and guidelines and policies, even if it's not working. He said, and he said 10% was generous, but that's another talk for another time.